it dramatizes the personal dominance, right, of this leader, that he can get away with all of this stuff. In a way, it increases his power for his most ardent followers. And it's only for people like the three of us sitting here that says, come on, this is unpresidential. This is outrageous. This has been going on for a long time. And we don't think that's actually going to work. It hasn't worked in other places. Remember, these patrimonial leaders in other instances, they serve a long time. Think about, like, Marcos, right, in the Philippines, right? It can go on a very, very long time, and the end can be ignominious. But I don't think that alone is going to, like, well, all this talk about the 25th Amendment, right, for getting rid of a president. It's a lot of talk. So that's number one. We don't think we'll get out of this. I mean, Steve knows a lot about factional infighting, so maybe I should hand that over to Steve, which we also don't think will help us.
Yeah, I mean, in the piece that we wrote and in the book too, we talk about the mistake people make of looking at factional, rivalries within a patrimonial household as somehow a sign of weakness. And you see it a lot in punditry about Trump as well. The MAGA civil war, as it's often referred to. You find that Marjorie Taylor Greene is suddenly getting on the outs and finally leaves Congress, or Tom Tillis takes a stand. Yeah, there are different groups within the Republican Party, more or less MAGA, but so far the pattern is pretty clear, which is the people who want to go into opposition just exit. They leave Congress, they resign, they don't run again, or, they kind of meekly go back to their corner and agree they were wrong and then serve, for a longer period of time. So that's very normal in patrimonial systems. I mean, the great father always has the rivals, underneath who are currying his favor. And we use the gendered term here, obviously. It's usually men who do this. So the idea is everyone wants to please daddy, but the one thing you can't do is say, I actually want to get rid of daddy. If you cross the line into open opposition like that, then you are, definitely in trouble. And in the full-fledged patrimonial systems like Putin's Russia, then, physical liquidation can result. So, we should stop worrying about the tiny little gradations of Christian nationalism versus libertarianism versus executive authority support, etc., as a sign of weakness. Those matter for the kind of understanding the factions that support this regime, but it's not the way the regime falls to see, suddenly there's an open rebellion of all the libertarians, for example.
Well, let's talk about Daddy. I mean, he's 79 years old right now. He's declining, and I would not be surprised at all if he was not able to complete his term because of, kind of just dropping dead at one point or some similar event. What's going to happen then? Does patrimonialism survive the death of the father?
That's an interesting question. In classic patrimonialism, of course, it's handed down within the family. And that's kingship is all about, or queenship. If you want to think about this family for a minute, that might be an interesting proposition. The interesting thing is that from a purely cognitive standpoint, the logical place is Ivanka. But that's there you get into the gendered aspect of it. These female patrimonial leaders, if you will, they don't actually do that well because there is an element of traditionalism to all of this. The strong man, the father of the family, which goes along with the Christian nationalism very well, not to mention that Ivanka's Jewish. So that might be problematic. The problem is that within Trump's orbit, you have both the kind of traditional kind of neocon tendency within Republican politics. That's there, let's say embodied by Rubio. But he couldn't capture those other elements of the Trump coalition. Then you have the Christian national part of it, which is J.D. Vance, but he probably couldn't capture the ones who just want lower taxes and aggressive foreign policy or kind of an internationalist foreign policy. So there's really no obvious leader, right, that will be able to kind of pick up the mantle immediately. And succession is always a problem. It is always a problem. I mean, that's, our procedural state, one of the things it does, apart from being a democracy, is we have a process for picking a new leader. That's democracy, right? But in classical patrimonialism, right, that's not how it works at all.
Yeah, let me add. I mean, this is where we do see the real vulnerabilities of patrimonialism in the US, since you're asking about that. The time limit really matters here. And part of that is just demographic. No one lives forever. Part of it is the term limits that still exist in the US Constitution and matter to lots of actors. You can't just wish it all away if you're Trump. This is why we think combating this Trump 2028 idea is so important. There's been a tendency to kind of laugh it off. The hats are funny, but they aren't at all funny, because this is actually one of the key strategies for a patrimonial regime to start playing fast and loose with a very hard deadline, which is the end of a 4-year term and only 2 terms total. The 22nd Amendment really, really matters here. And Henry Hale at George Washington University wrote the best book on this in the Eurasian context. He says it's really when the sort of underlings begin to realize that the time limit is coming up, that the leader is simply too sick to continue, or, there really is an election and there's too much protest to continue. That's when the underlings who are purely instrumental start thinking, do I want to keep loyalty to this particular father figure? Or is there a different father figure, maybe a bit younger, a bit more savvy, a bit more popular, I could switch to? And the whole house of cards can fall incredibly quickly because there's not a lot of principle behind this sort of regime. People aren't obeying it because of loyalty to the idea. Another big difference from China, by the way, under the PRC. Whatever you think of communism, it is an idea. People can believe in it. But believing in Trumpism really is just believing in your own self-interest and the kind of machismo of the leader. So that's actually underneath it all kind of fragile when it hits these time limits.
Yeah, so that actually brings up the question of the upcoming midterm election in November. There's been some disagreement in my circle as to the degree of danger that Trump will try to manipulate the outcome. A colleague of mine pointed out that actually, because of the degree of corruption within the administration more broadly, there are a lot of players that actually would fear losing power because they will be vulnerable to criminal prosecution, right? Including, it looks like, the Attorney General of the United States. And that gives everybody a big incentive not to lose power. Do you have an opinion about the likelihood that we are going to have a free and fair election in November?